In a small village nestled at the edge of an ancient forest, there was a story parents told their children to keep them from wandering too far into the woods. They spoke of the Singing Pines, a grove deep within the forest where the trees sang a haunting lullaby. It was said that those who followed the song would never return, their voices joining the eerie melody forever. Maya, a young woman with a thirst for adventure, had heard the tale countless times growing up. But she was older now, braver, and more curious than ever. The stories that once frightened her had become a challenge, and she decided to find the Singing Pines for herself. Armed with only a small backpack and a lantern, she set off one evening as the sun began to sink behind the trees. The forest was dense, and as Maya walked, the sounds of the village faded away, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. The deeper she ventured, the thicker the trees became, their trunks twisted and gnarled as if shaped by some ancient force. Shadows lengthened around her, and the air grew colder, but she pressed on, her determination unshaken. After hours of walking, just as night fully enveloped the forest, Maya heard it, the faintest hint of a melody drifting through the trees. It was soft, almost like a whisper, but unmistakably a song. A chill ran down her spine, but curiosity pushed her forward. The song grew clearer, more distinct, as if the trees themselves were humming a lullaby. The melody was beautiful, yet there was something unsettling about it, a sadness that clung to each note. The trees around her seemed to sway in time with the music, their branches creaking as if they were part of the song. Maya followed the sound, deeper into the forest, her feet moving of their own accord. The path beneath her seemed to vanish, replaced by a soft, spongy ground that absorbed her footsteps. Finally, she arrived at the grove. The trees here were different, taller, older, and their bark almost black in the dim light of the lantern. The air was thick with the melody, and Maya felt a strange compulsion to sit beneath one of the massive pines. She set down her lantern and leaned back against the rough bark, closing her eyes as the lullaby washed over her. But as she listened, something changed. The melody, once soothing, began to shift, becoming discordant and harsh. The trees no longer swayed gently but twisted and writhed as if in pain. Maya's eyes snapped open, and she saw the pines moving closer, their branches reaching down toward her like claws. She tried to stand, to run, but her body refused to move. The song filled her mind, drowning out her thoughts, pulling her deeper into the grove. The branches wrapped around her, tightening like a vice as the trees hummed louder, the melody now a cacophony of voices crying out in despair. Maya's scream was lost in the song as the pines enveloped her, their rough bark pressing against her skin, merging with her flesh. She felt herself being pulled into the tree, becoming one with it, her voice joining the others in the eternal lullaby. The next morning, the villagers noticed that Maya had not returned. Search parties were sent into the forest, but they found no trace of her, only her abandoned lantern at the edge of the grove. The trees stood tall and silent, as they always had, their branches gently swaying in the wind. But on quiet nights, when the wind was still, the villagers swore they could hear a faint melody drifting from the forest, the lullaby of the Singing Pines, a song of sorrow and loss that echoed through the ages, forever calling out to those who dared to listen. Jake was an experienced hiker. He had trekked through countless forests, braved harsh weather, and camped in remote areas. But this forest was different. Locals called it the Vale, claiming it was a place where the world of the living and the dead overlapped. Jake didn't believe in superstitions, so when he heard about the Vale, he saw it as just another challenge. He set out early in the morning, the dense fog clinging to the ground as he made his way along the narrow path. The trees were ancient, their thick trunks covered in moss, and their branches twisted in unnatural shapes. The deeper he went, the more the forest seemed to close in around him, the trees forming a wall of green that blocked out the sun. As the day wore on, Jake realized something was off. The birds had stopped singing, and the usual sounds of the forest rustling leaves, scurrying animals were absent. The silence was unsettling, but Jake pressed on, determined to reach the heart of the forest before nightfall. He arrived at a small clearing just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ground. He set up his camp quickly, lighting a fire to keep the growing darkness at bay. As he sat by the fire, eating a simple meal, he noticed something strange: eyes. Dozens of eyes glinting in the dark, just beyond the reach of the firelight. At first, Jake thought they belonged to animals, perhaps wolves or coyotes. But as he stared back, he realized these eyes were different. They were too high off the ground, too still and too human. A chill ran down his spine as the eyes remained fixed on him, unblinking and unmoving. He tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling himself it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. But the longer he stared, the more he became convinced that these weren't the eyes of animals. They were something else, something that didn't belong in the natural world. Suddenly, one pair of eyes blinked, and then another, and another, until all of them were blinking in a synchronized, unnerving pattern. The fire crackled loudly as if in warning, but Jake couldn't tear his gaze away. The eyes seemed to be drawing him in, compelling him to come closer, to step into the darkness where they waited. Against his better judgment, Jake stood up, moving toward the edge of the clearing. The eyes receded slightly, luring him deeper into the forest. The fire behind him flickered weakly, and the darkness seemed to grow thicker, almost tangible. He stepped into the shadows, the eyes leading him onward, until the light of his campfire was just a distant memory. As he followed the trail of blinking eyes, the forest grew colder, the trees twisting into grotesque shapes. The ground beneath his feet became soft, almost like quicksand, sucking him in with each step. The eyes were closer now, surrounding him, their blinking more frantic, more eager. Jake's mind screamed at him to turn back, to run, but his body wouldn't obey. The eyes had him now, and there was no escape. He stumbled into a small glade, the ground sinking beneath him, and the eyes moved in closer, their owners still hidden in the dark. He could feel their breath on his skin, cold and unnatural, as they closed in on him. In his final moments, Jake realized the truth. The Vale was not just a forest. It was a gateway, a place where the souls of the lost lingered, waiting for someone to join them. The eyes that had watched him were the spirits of those who had come before, and now they had found a new companion. The next day, when a search party arrived, all they found was Jake's abandoned camp. His gear was untouched, the fire long since burned out. But there was no sign of Jake, only the strange, uneven footprints that led into the forest and stopped abruptly at the edge of the glade. And at night, if you dare to enter the Vale, you might just see them. Dozens of eyes watching from the darkness, waiting for you to join them. It was a night like any other when Sarah decided to take a walk through the forest near her family's cabin. The air was cool, the moon was bright, and the trees whispered with the wind. She had walked this path countless times, but tonight something felt different. The forest seemed to hold its breath, and an unnatural silence hung in the air. As she ventured deeper into the woods, the moonlight struggled to penetrate the thick canopy, casting eerie shadows that danced across the ground. Sarah's footsteps crunched on the fallen leaves, the only sound in the oppressive quiet. Suddenly, she heard it, a faint whispering, like the rustle of leaves, but with a sinister undertone. She stopped, straining her ears to catch the sound, but it faded into the background, leaving her with a sense of unease. Shrugging off the chill that crept up her spine, she continued on her way, determined to reach the small clearing she loved so much. But the whispers returned, louder this time, and unmistakably human. They seemed to come from all around her, surrounding her in a chorus of unintelligible murmurs. Panic set in as she realized she couldn't make out the words, but she could feel the malice in them. Sarah quickened her pace, her heart pounding in her chest. The path that was once so familiar now seemed to twist and turn in ways she didn't recognize. The trees, once welcoming, now loomed over her, their branches like skeletal hands reaching out to grab her. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as if they were trying to tell her something she didn't want to hear. In her frantic state, she stumbled into the clearing, but it was not the sanctuary she had hoped for. The moonlight revealed a circle of ancient, gnarled trees, their trunks blackened as if charred by some long-forgotten fire. In the center of the clearing stood an old, twisted oak, its bark scarred with strange symbols that pulsed with a dim, red light. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices, each one filled with a venomous hatred. Sarah backed away, her eyes wide with terror as she saw the ground at the base of the oak begin to shift and move. From the earth emerged a figure, its body twisted and unnatural, formed from the roots and soil itself. Its eyes were hollow, yet she could feel its gaze pierce through her. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. The figure raised a hand, and the whisper stopped, replaced by a chilling silence. It pointed at her, and in that moment, Sarah understood the truth. The forest had claimed her. The last thing she saw was the roots of the oak tree slithering across the ground, reaching for her, pulling her down into the cold, dark earth. The next morning, the forest was as peaceful as ever. The sun filtered through the leaves, birds chirped in the distance, and the wind rustled through the trees. But Sarah was never seen again. The only sign of her passing was a new scar on the twisted oak in the clearing, a single, freshly carved symbol that glowed faintly in the moonlight. And sometimes, on the darkest nights, the forest whispers her name.